withdrawn from this meeting due to a technical matter related to land ownership that must be resolved before the application can be determined by the local planning authority. For the benefit of those watching on our YouTube channel, members of the committee are present in the chamber, and these members will be voting on proposals this evening. Other members of the council are also in attendance or participating via MS Teams and can take part in any discussions, ask questions, but cannot vote. Your attention is drawn to agenda item 1, which sets out the guidance of how meetings will be conducted, including the ground rules. Your attention is also drawn to the rules for public speaking in respect of planning applications and planning committee procedure rules in the council's constitution, which apply to this planning committee meeting. I note that there has been a lot of public interest in one of the items, or the only item we have today, on the agenda tonight. So for me to be able to effectively manage the meeting, I would appreciate it if members of the public and councillors speaking tonight only deal with the planning applications before us tonight and do not stray onto other matters. Please be advised that it is a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting or rally. Members of the public are very welcome to join us to observe the formal meeting, but should not be disruptive. I do not wish to hear any applause or other noises of support or derision for any speakers, be they public or committee members. As a member of the public, if you feel you cannot contain yourself, there is a committee room on the other side of the entrance where officers have set up a screen where you can view the proceedings. Before we start the formal business, can we confirm attendance of voter members by doing a roll call?
Chair, when I call your name, can you please confirm that you are present? Councillor Palmer?
Present.
Councillor Brown?
Present.
Councillor Banks?
Present.
Received apologies from Councillor Batts, Councillor Bolton,
I'm here.
Councillor Boxall.
Yeah.
We have received apologies from Councillor Coffin, Councillor Chris.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Present.
Councillor Harman. We have received apologies from Councillor Harman, Councillor Hudson.
Present.
We have received apologies from Councillor Lark, Councillor Roud, Councillor Tanner,
Present.
Councillor Tatton,
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Great from my sick bed, but present.
I can confirm that we have 12 voting members present.
Thank you. We'd like to take our officers present in the chamber to introduce themselves.
Good evening, members. James Bailey, Head of Planning. Thank you.
Anna Parker, Development Manager. Susan Fields, Senior Planning Officer.
Thank you.
Joy Ikadike, Head of Legal Services.
Value One, Democratic Services Officer.
Members of the public, the applicant and or agent wishing to address the planning committee are present in the chamber and will be invited to speak at the appropriate time. The speaking time limit of 3 minutes for each application continues to be applied, and public speakers are unable to participate in any discussion of the application. Please may I remind speakers that your face and voice may appear on the live stream and the archived recording of the meeting, and your names will be recorded in the minutes. Thank you. We've had apologies. Any other apologies from anyone? We're all, apart from that, we're all here. Declarations of interest from anybody? Councillor Adam.
Thank you, Chairman. Simply for transparency, I wanted to declare that I was previously the clerk at Teesside Parish Council, and a response was submitted by that parish. Because I expected this to come to committee, I didn't have any involvement in that response, but I just wanted to be open about my position. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have minutes as this is an extraordinary meeting and we only had our meeting last Wednesday. Right, we are here to consider application MOD land south of Discovery Drive, Kings Hill, West Malling. We have the officers' report first.
Thank you, Chair. Since writing the committee report, the Council has published its 5-year housing land supply position. This changes the figure within the committee report from 4.36 to 3.97. In addition, the updated National Planning Policy Framework was published today. This will remove the methodology for which our housing land supply figure was considered against, and as a consequence, it is possible that this will reduce that figure even further. Therefore, the presumption in favour of development remains engaged for this development. Your officers have also reviewed the updated NPPF in regard to other changes, and for the purpose of this application, do not consider that any of the amendment changed the officer's recommendation before you tonight. Some paragraph references within the committee report will obviously now not align with the new NPPF. A couple of other points for clarification. Paragraph 5.21, there is a typing error and the number of third-party representations received on the first round of consultation was 486. Also, paragraph 7.3 should refer to the Development Land Allocations Development Plan document. If the application before you is an outline application for up to 65 dwellings with all matters reserved except for access. The first slide. This site is formed of an area of land located between Clare Hart Lane to the west, Keston Road to the north, and Kettridge Lane to the south. The site is undeveloped land with some mature and sapling trees. The site is located within the settlement confines of Kings Hill. Historically, the site was formed part of the airfield, and evidence of past standing on the site points to this previous use. Within the site, there are 7 groups of trees, 3 individual trees, and 1 woodland area which benefit from tree preservation orders. There are also parcels of ancient woodland adjacent to, but not within the site, to the north, east, and south of the site. The adjacent woodland to the south, known as Kettering Wood, covers a substantial area and also designated as a wildlife asset. As set out in the committee report, the site is designated allocated site known as F Kings Hill, as set out in policy H1, the Development Land Allocations DPD. The site description and requirement, as set out on the slide, includes 40% affordable housing, open space or contributions, footpath, cycle routes, etc., linking with the existing area, financial contribution, retention of important trees, and mitigation measures. As already mentioned, this is an outline application with all matters reserved apart from access. This means that only the principle of development, the quantum of development, and access within the red-edged area are only matters for consideration at this stage. Turning to the principle of development and the quantum of development, the principle is established by the allocation and the quantum of development reflects that set out within the allocation. The slide shows the allocation H1F as set out in the adopted local plan and also shows the site within its location to the settlement boundary. Access is proposed from Clear Hart Lane, which would represent a continuation of the existing adopted highway. The access point is out there with the cursor. This slide shows the access itself in more details. The access includes mitigation measures agreed with Kent Fire as set out in paragraph 7.12 and 7.13 of the committee report. Just a couple of slides. This one is from Clear Hart Lane looking down towards the site. Next one would be standing at the access, looking towards the public footpath or the footpath. And these two are standing from the access looking down towards or down Clear Hart Lane looking towards the roundabout. This slide shows the indicative master plan submitted with the application. Just to put the proposal into context, but as indicative, it only serves to demonstrate what could be envisaged for the site. In summary, the site is an allocated site in the council's adopted plan. The site is within the settlement boundary of Kings Hill. Kent County Council as Highway Authority have raised no objection to the proposed access. Council currently cannot demonstrate an up-to-date housing land supply when measured against its objectively assessed need. The site is not located within any protected areas as set out in the framework that would provide a clear reason for refusing the development. Paragraph 11D of the framework and the presumption in favour of development is therefore engaged when determining this application. As such, the recommendation is to approve subject to a section 106. Thank you.
Thank you. Very clear. Right, we have a number of speakers on this application. If you could bear with me, the list is a little confused, so I will take my time in calling you up. First of all, could I have public speakers? You've come to hear, you have 3 minutes, we will time you. And the first speaker is Anthony Petty from the Parish Council. You and on your speaker, I'll start when you're ready. Just about, yeah.
As chairman of Kings Hill Parish Council and a proud resident of this community, I'm here tonight to voice our strong opposition to the proposed development at Clearheart Lane. The project raises serious concerns about safety, sustainability, our community's future, and I urge you to reject this application. The proposed addition of 65 homes in Clearheart Lane, creating a total of 95 homes served by a single access point, is not just impractical, it is dangerous. The Kent Design Guide explicitly requires alternative emergency access for developments exceeding 50 homes. This guideline exists for a reason, to protect lives. Without an adequate emergency access plan, development leaves residents vulnerable to fires, natural disasters, and infrastructure failures. The suggestion that a fire tender could bypass obstructions by using a footway is deeply flawed. The drawing R190045/012 does not address the broader context of Clearheart Lane, including its service to 30 existing homes. Furthermore, the area's history, riddled with sinkholes, bomb craters, and unexploded ordnance from its time as RAF Westmoreland Aerodrome, only mitigates the risks of such a development. Approving this application without proper safeguards would not only violate safety standards, but also betray our duty to protect the community. Safety is non-negotiable. This is a matter of life and death. Beyond safety, the proposed development perpetuates car dependency, a step in the wrong direction in today's world. The National Planning Policy Framework emphasises the importance of prioritising pedestrian, cycling, public transport options. This proposal blatantly ignores those principles, offering no meaningful solutions to improve public transport. Instead, it isolates residents, worsens traffic congestion, and increases its pollution. In an area where sustainability is more critical than ever, we cannot afford to greenlight developments that fail to prioritise accessibility and environmental responsibility. Car-dependent design undermines the very fabric of a thriving, connected and sustainable community. This is not just about rejecting flawed application, it's about demanding better for Kings Hill. We deserve developments that prioritise safety, sustainability and quality of life, not projects that cut corners at the expense of our community's well-being. Given the risks of safety, sustainability and compliance with planning standards, I urge you to refuse this application. Let us demand a thoughtful, responsible approach to development, one that protects our community today and for generations to come. Anthony Petty, Chairman, Kings Hill Parish Council.
I did read out that I didn't want to have any noises of support or derision from the public at any time. If you cannot contain yourself, please remove yourself from the room. Thank you, Mr. Petty. Next on my list is Margaret Coleman. Have a Margaret Coleman? No? You're not speaking. Okay. Mike Hartman. Okay. So let's go down my list. I next have Ian Farrington. Can you come to the front, please, sir?
On already. Thank you. I'm a resident in MacArthur Drive and object to this application for 3 reasons. First, principle. Approval is sought for the principle of development on the underlying basis in section 6 that an area known as H1F was historically designated for development in the 2008 to 2021 DLA, and that the framework principle of presumption in favour should override good practice and guidance. But this underlying basis, and therefore the conclusions in section 8, are unsound because the DLA expired 3 years ago and has no longer any planning significance. The land supply position last year and updated this October has not disclosed plans to use Area 1F in the foreseeable future. And in any event, since 2008, the local planning mix has changed, substituting commercial units with residential homes. This substitution has provided clear reasons not to apply the presumption in favour principle. For example, it's provided significantly more homes than would otherwise have been available. It's allowed animals and plants with statutory protection to remain undisturbed. It's put public safety first for those using the bridleway, and it's avoided breaching the approved boundary edge of Kings Hill. Second, access. Approval is sought for access covering both this application and also future developments. This is because no distinction is made in paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2 between the application on the one hand and Area 1F on the other. But this application only covers about half the total space provided by Area 1F, leaving the remainder and potential pockets of surrounding land to be accessed in future. The wider consequences of granting access have not been considered or addressed. In particular, emergency access relies in section 7 on the applicant's own mitigation plans for its own development and the presumption of favour principle overriding public safety guidance on access. Neither reliance has been reassessed. KCC Highway and the rescue services have not considered additional access needs. Traffic impact statements have not been updated to reflect volume increases, and the public safety impact of cutting across the bridleway has not been considered. Finally, quantum. Approval is sought for the maximum possible quantum of 65 homes, sacrificing in the process guidance and good practice specifically, and the local area generally. The council's own DLA assessment was that a density of about half this was compatible with the character and amenity of the surrounding areas. In conclusion, the application should be rejected because the development in principle, the means of access, and the general quantum are not supportable.
Thank you. Next on my list, I have Matt Jones. Thank you, Ms. Jones. If you take a seat and turn it on, I'll start when you're ready.
Right, the recommendations presented to committee today are based on flawed and inaccurate information contained in a desktop report on public transport and other expert reports. For example, the report refers to multiple bus services across the county, giving the impression the area is commutable via public transport. The buses referred to as school buses are not adult transport at all. The truth is, even the bus routes to the station, X1 and X2, have been cancelled. 65 dwellings built on the proposed site will likely generate 130 additional cars, and the residents of larger homes are likely to have children, so the number of cars will only increase as there are no viable alternatives to car use for work outside of Kings Hill. These additional cars will create additional CO2 levels, and there will be fewer trees to absorb the additional CO2 if plans are approved. This will further reduce the air quality, which could lead to higher prevalence of asthma, allergies, lung and heart disease, and childhood cancer in Kings Hill. Air pollution also negatively impacts neurodevelopment and cognitive ability. Allowing this health risk could breach the Clean Air Human Rights Bill, or Ella's Law, named after the first UK child to die of air pollution aged 9 in 2013. All of this additional risk to adult and child health is completely avoidable by protecting the trees we have, considering change of use projects and projects that are actually aligned to the UK's world commitments to net zero, halting and reversing the damage caused by cutting down trees. The infrastructure in area can't cope with GPs already severely overburdened. Those that can't access GP appointments try to access the local pharmacy, and they are also severely overstretched with long queues regularly. Kings Hill children aren't able to get places in our closest secondary school as it's oversubscribed. There are two petitions, one with 3,402 names and the second with 559 names. 1,531 objections were submitted to this proposal and a further 1,000 objections to the inclusion of this site being designated in the local plan. These thousands of people concur with the objections I am voicing tonight. I urge you not to approve this application. Listen to the valid objections of the thousands of local residents that want to stop this needless destruction and role model the UK pledge to net zero and halt deforestation at local level. Committee members should refuse the application as it is completely out of kilter with UK government world pledges and forthcoming Clean Air Human Rights Law.
Thank you. Right. Next on my list is Wendy Rush. You're one of the Kings Hill tree wardens, I understand.
I represent the King Hill Parish Council tree wardens to express our significant concerns and objections regarding this application. We have serious concerns about the accuracy of the submitted information and dispute the officer's report with regards to the impact on the local ecology and biodiversity mitigation. Despite claims to the contrary, the development application would devastate an important area for wildlife and biodiversity, which has been established and undisturbed for 50 years or more and registered as a priority habitat inventory deciduous woodland. The impact on biodiversity and habitat loss is unquestionable. Its role as a wildlife corridor between Cattering Wood and Warren Wood also helps support neighbouring ancient woodland, and its loss would significantly impact on those areas. This application is contrary to policies NE2, NE3 and NE4. A wildlife corridor cannot be compensated for by an off-site mitigation location. The biodiversity calculation for the existing area is wrong. This is woodland with glades and not multiple areas of different types. The off-site location where it's proposed this loss is mitigated is Grade 2 agricultural land, which contributes to national food security. This contravenes policy CP9. The proposed development is not exceptionally justified, and this development is contrary to the requirements of policy NE1. Natural England Tree Strategy focuses on expanding, protecting and improving woodlands as they help combat climate change and recover biodiversity. This planning application contravenes this as it eradicates woodland. There are many established older trees on the site which help to offset the greenhouse gas emissions and slow down global warming. Replacing established trees with saplings is no compensation as they're unable to sequester CO2 at the same rate as more mature trees. Given the sensitivity of ancient woodland, many sources recommend a 30 to 50 metre exclusion zone to be applied to ancient woodland with protected planting, as opposed to the minimal 15 metres suggested by the developers. In addition, the 80 metre band of trees at the north end of the site appear to be veteran trees, having been pollarded for well in excess of 100 years and should be afforded protection in line with government guidelines, with the base of some of these trees being well over 1 metre. This also applies to veteran trees in the other neighbouring ancient woodland. This is a rich biodiverse site. Tregothnan Estates Ecology Report notes the presence of the hazel dormouse, serotine bat and reptile species on the site. All of these species are at risk of extinction and are protected by EU and UK legislation. The mitigation measures proposed would not address the harm that would arise. Bluebells have been evidenced and identified on the site and are protected by law under the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981. The damage caused to protected species by development of this site with insufficient and inappropriate mitigation options is in direct contravention of the protection of habitat and biodiversity, as detailed in the Tunbridge and Morning Climate Change Action Plan 21-22. This planning application should be rejected because it fails to protect an important stretch of long-established woodland that includes ancient woodland and is an important wildlife corridor, which, if lost, would directly impact the viability of other areas of ancient woodland.
Thank you. My next speaker is Nigel Hartnip. Sorry if I've pronounced that wrong. Yes. I'll start when you're ready.
My name is Nigel Hartnup and I'm a resident of Clearheart Lane. I'd like to set out why this planning application should be rejected on the grounds of sustainable travel and traffic impact. Proposed development fails to comply with the National Planning Policy Framework and guidelines set out by Active Travel England on the basis of 4 points. Firstly, the NPPF states that development should give priority first to pedestrian and cycle movements. Proposed development actively diminishes safe pedestrian and cycle movements by interrupting the bridleway footpath that would need to be crossed when extending Clearheart Lane into the new housing. This footpath is heavily used by the community, including a large number of children travelling to and from the nearby Discovery School, and the proposed development and associated construction will directly increase the risk to footpath users. Secondly, the NPPF states that development should facilitate access to high-quality public transport with layouts that maximise the catchment area for bus or other public transport services. Both the applicant's transport statement and the planning officer's report contain misleading inaccuracies when setting out the current public transport provision. Section 723 of the planning officer's report states the X1 and X2 bus services provide a regular service between Maidstone and West Malling train station. These services were axed 2 years ago, so it's surprising to see them referenced under the sustainable travel section of the planning officer's report. The applicant's transport statement refers to the 72 bus service providing hourly services between 9 AM and 6 PM Monday through Friday. This is an overstatement as the first bus is at 09:33 and afternoon services are 2 hours apart, meaning they're unsuitable for commuting purposes. In addition, the transport statement refers to 15 bus services in the peak morning periods, but these are predominantly school transport services. This undermines the report's conclusion the frequency and variety of destinations serviced by bus routes within the vicinity of the site ensures it's a viable mode of travel for commuter and leisure trips. Thirdly, sections 724 and 726 of the report rely on assumed traffic movements from a previous planning application submitted 7 years ago, at a time when public transport provision was greater than today. This materially understates traffic movements associated with this proposed development. The inaccuracies contained within the reports around public transport provision means that residents will have limited options for sustainable travel, leading to an increased reliance on private vehicles. This not only contradicts the principles of sustainable development, but also exacerbates traffic congestion and pollution. Active Travel England's guidelines stress the need for developments to support public transport options to reduce car dependency. The current proposal fails to address this critical aspect further, highlighting its inadequacy. Fourthly, the increased traffic resulting from this development will have a detrimental impact on the local community. The roads in this area are already under significant strain, as witnessed in the last 2 weeks with gridlock attempting to exit Kings Hill during the morning peak, and adding more vehicles will only worsen the situation, particularly as West Malling train station car park is over capacity. This is not just an inconvenience, it poses a safety risk to pedestrians and cyclists, particularly children and the elderly. In conclusion, this planning application should be refused on the basis of its non-compliance with the National Planning Policy Framework, as it fails to prioritise pedestrian and cycle movements and does not facilitate access to high-quality public transport.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nigel Hart.
My name is Nigel Hart. I'm a local resident of Kings Hill. I would like to begin by reminding the Council of a previous outline planning application for up to 85 residential units north of 51 Amber Lane in Kings Hill, which was refused in June 2019. There are several striking similarities between the Amber Lane proposal and the current application for the development south of Discovery Drive. The grounds for refusal in the Amber Lane case are highly relevant to this proposal and warrant consideration. Firstly, the Amber Lane development was refused due to the loss and deterioration of irreplaceable woodland, a key habitat. The council found no justification for this harm. Similarly, the proposal being discussed today involves environmental damage that needs to be carefully considered. This is contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework and the standing advice of Natural England and the Forestry Commission. Secondly, the Amber Lane development was rejected because it failed to integrate cohesively with the surrounding residential area, harming visual amenity and character of Kings Hill. The proposed development south of Discovery Drive also seems at odds with the established character of the area, disrupting the natural boundary along the bridleway and reintroducing urbanising features. This is contrary to core policy CP24 and the national planning policy. Thirdly, the design and scale of the vehicular access into Amber Lane application were deemed to erode the site's character and create visual harm. This proposal similarly involves deep excavations towards the end of Clearheart Lane and onwards into the development, which risks damaging the green space and the aesthetics of the surrounding area. Again, this is contrary to core policy CP24 and the national policy framework. Another key refusal point was the development would increase vehicular activity on Amber Lane, creating noise and disturbance for residents due to the development scale. The same concern applies to Clearheart Lane with the properties along Charlotte and MacArthur Drive, where increased traffic would impact residents' quality of life, more than trebling the number of access egress movements. Finally, the council was not satisfied with the access strategy for Amber Lane, that it could be delivered safely. This is particularly relevant for this proposal, where the construction access and the safety of residents and pedestrians are of significant concerns, considering construction and services need to be installed, maintaining a safe environment. In conclusion, the development proposal discussed today mirrors many of the issues that led to the refusal of Amber Lane. These include concerns about access, egress, environmental damage and scale and impact on local residents. I urge the council to reassess and refuse this development proposal, taking into account the clear precedent set by Amber Lane. Thank you.
My next speaker is Kieran Murphy. Can you turn the microphone on? That's it. That's it. There you go.
As a resident of MacArthur Drive, I reject this application based on infrastructure. Residents should be able to access healthcare when they need it. For a period of time, residents of Kings Hill have raised concerns about their ability to secure appointments with their GP at Kings Hill practice. Westmoreland Group Practice is in a group of practices serving a total of 60,000 patients in the local area. The ongoing development of houses in the area already resulted in the practice being overcapacitated. The recently granted planning permission for one 78-bed care home in Kings Hill and a 70-bed care home in Westmoreland, of which patients will be served by the Westmoreland practice. This will result in further limitation of appointments. It is a basic necessity that children and families living in Kings Hill should be able to access early years education and schooling. The largest nursery on Kings Hill, Bright Horizon, is already at capacity and not able to offer full-time or part-time places, reflecting the already existing demand on local provision. This contradicts the findings of a 2023 international research report published by the government. Children who spend longer in early years provisions have better educational outcomes. The same theme applies to the primary school education in Kings Hill. The Discovery Primary School is the largest primary school on Kings Hill, is a 3 class per year school, which is full with a waiting list for each year. Kings Hill Primary School is also full with a waiting list, and Valley and Victor is a 1 class per year primary school supporting children with additional needs. This has a 4.33 application per place for each year. The housing is also going to increase demand on primary education and is likely to result in some children having to access schooling outside Kings Hill. This is not to mention the significant congestion that we'll have within the perimeter of the school. Despite extensive development on Kings Hill, there has been no developments into secondary education. There are no secondary schools on Kings Hill. Children are having to travel outside of the area to access secondary education. The housing that is being proposed is aimed at families and will create further demand on secondary school placements, which is going to put further demands on school in which children who live closer to will be prioritised. This could result in children having to travel further to access schooling. Kings Hill is a rural area with limited access to public transport. Buses are infrequent or absent. The local train station is a 45-minute walk from this area. This results in increases in vehicle use, causing the already breaking point of parking to indeed break. And for these reasons, I object the application.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Karen Bell.
My name is Karen Bell and I'm here representing the community in Kings Hill by expressing my unequivocal opposition to this project and to urge you to reject it for the sake of our environment, our community and our commitment towards climate goals. This proposal represents an alarming threat to our natural environment and our ability to meet critical climate obligations. It is essential to consider the wider consequences of approving such an application, particularly in the context of the England Tree Strategy, the Climate Change Act, the Paris Agreement and the Tunbridge and Moreland Climate Action Change Strategy. The England Tree Strategy highlights the necessity of expanding and preserving woodlands to combat climate change, restore biodiversity and enhance ecosystems. Yet this development will result in the destruction of B-grade trees with decades of life remaining, along with other vital scrub and vegetation that sustain the local ecosystem. The suggestion that sapling replacements can compensate for this destruction is both misguided and inadequate. Mature trees are irreplaceable and their loss would leave a devastating void in biodiversity and environmental health. The Climate Change Act legally binds the UK to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 50% by 2025 and achieve net zero by 2050. Approving this development, which destroys mature carbon-absorbing trees, directly undermines these goals in an era when climate change is a declared emergency. This proposal is not just inconsistent with our obligations, it is reckless. On the international stage, the Paris Agreement commits us to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This development, which accelerates biodiversity loss and carbon emissions, blatantly contradicts the commitments we made to the global community. Closer to home, the Tunbridge and Moreland Climate Change Strategy outlines a vision for carbon neutrality by 2030. Approving this application would shatter that vision. The environmental damage from this proposal will not only halt progress, but sets us back significantly in our local climate efforts. The applicant's own biodiversity net gain reports predicts a catastrophic 40% loss in biodiversity with no realistic plan for mitigation. Such a deficit cannot and must not be justified under any circumstances. Finally, I must address the Planning Officer's report. Its reliance on outdated data and its willingness to accept compromises undermine the integrity of the decision-making process. We cannot make informed, responsible choices based on flawed or incomplete information. This development is not just another planning application. It is a litmus test of our commitment to the environment, to our responsibilities as a community and to future generations. It directly contradicts national policies, international agreements and local climate strategies. I implore you to prioritise the well-being of our community, our environment and thank you.
Thank you. My next one, I'm going to pronounce this wrong. Felix McClymont. Sorry. How do you pronounce it? McClymont. Thank you.
Okay, I'm a resident of Kings Hill and the parish councillor. I'm a parish councillor. I actually look after the Planning and Transport Committee for the local council in Kings Hill. Now, we've touched on quite a few subjects which I've had on my list here, but I'm just going to recap very quickly. Going back to the bus service, we had the X1 and X2. That was abolished about 2 years ago, and we don't have a service. I've noticed that Tunbridge Moorling Council has actually published this on the report saying that we do have a valid bus service. We don't. And if we are going ahead with this development, Tunbridge Moorling Council must make sure they do put in some sort of a guideline to the developers that they do put in a bus service for at least 10 years, which is something I'm sure the developers can afford to do. Also, subject of the fire buffer on this new development, which they are looking at putting in, I noticed it actually backs onto some forestations or how we say green space. Now we need to be very careful with things like this because in the last 2 years we've had some very large fires along the A228 and the M20 coming from London into Kent, and we've had a number of houses which were destroyed due to developers building on these green spaces and not putting in fire buffers. These are stipulations which need to be put into place if this development does go ahead. Apart from that, most people have touched on a few of the subjects which I wanted to touch on, so I'm not going to go through them again. But that's all I have to say for now.
Thank you. I appreciate you being brief and summarising. Thank you. Next speaker is Joan Timon. Joan, yeah. If you press it off and then back on again.
Good evening. I'm a resident of MacArthur Drive and my property is directly next to the bridle path and the woods which are the proposed area for development. We have no road access and enjoy the peace and quiet. Many residents are shift workers in essential roles, relying on this quiet environment for daytime sleep. Our homes border up to within a metre of the bridle path, which is just 2 metres wide in some places. The loss of the woodland, noise and disruption from the development and subsequent noise pollution will have a devastating effect on our physical and mental health. Can you imagine having a pole driver a metre away from your home? Apart from the noise and dirt, this is not good for the structure of the existing properties. Many sinkholes have appeared in Kings Hill. Developing land modifies the surface drainage and alters the load, causing sinkholes to develop. Additionally, we know from the very large craters on the bridle path edge, it was heavily bombed when the land was part of RAF Westmoreland. As with many other developments on Kings Hill, unexploded devices are likely to be found. The difference here being there are already homes metres away. We have a newborn baby in our house and the thought of this causes great anxiety. Are we expected to live in fear for years while the development is built? Myself, along with my neighbours, are not anti-development, but building needs to be in suitable locations. Woodland, which is home to endangered species, veteran trees and metres from existing homes is not suitable. If more building must take place in our already stretched village, perhaps look to the official Kings Hill website, which lists over 200,000 square metres of empty commercial space. That said, the hundreds of Bellway homes still available would suggest the appetite to buy on Kings Hill is not currently there. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have David Rush.
This application fails to meet many TMPC policies, including CP1. The parish of Kings Hill is one of the worst in terms of carbon footprint for consumption in the UK, and this would make it worse. CP2, there is essentially no public transport at peak times for Kings Hill, as all drivers are driving buses for school children. CC3, the removal of trees in the area neighbourhoods in the area neighbouring the built-up area will impact on the water environment. Its removal could impact on the SUDS design for the existing built-up areas. There have already been a number of sinkholes in Kings Hill relating to failed SUDS design. Any 1, 2 and 3, the development would have a horrendous impact on both local ecology and the sustainability of the neighbouring woodland, including ancient woodland. It is a critical wildlife corridor. The way that the existing site has been classified is in the biodiversity calculation is incredibly disappointing. Thus, paragraph 118 of NPPF actually applies, and sustainability should be taken into account. Any 428, have your cake and eat it, is all I can say for that one. SQ1 is not in keeping with local distinctiveness. SQ5, there is inadequate sewage capacity, as already just demonstrated by the frequent foul smells at the western end of Beacon Avenue. SQ7, there is inadequate consideration for cycling, not following guidelines for shared pavements on the existing infrastructure. The open spaces are subject to removal by the developer, as attempted with the plans to develop the fields north of Amber Lane. The healthcare provision is inadequate. SQ8, the existing Clearheart Lane road is inadequate to support 94 properties, according to guidelines. The crossing of the bridle path will significantly increase the risk to pedestrians, cyclists and horse riders. SQ9, isolating the area in the current design is likely to increase crime. OS1, mitigation for biodiversity and carbon sink is inadequate. The only protected areas in Kings Hill are in phase 1, and some have already been sacrificed. OS3, OS4, inadequate provision for open space and its maintenance, and OS7, demarcation of the fringes being blurred by the development. This application includes many inaccuracies, including the site is not brownfields. There are 2 small areas of hard standing. Calling it brownfield is like calling the whole of Kent's brownfield because it has Maidstone in it. This site is not within the extent of Kings Hill. There are no houses that are part of Kings Hill beyond it. Kings Hill is not urban. The government specifies urban is defined above 10,000 residents. According to the latest census report, this does not apply. The Kings Hill developer can lift and shift critical resources such as the sports park, so any planning application that are dependent on these should be rejected. The paths on Kings Hill are permissive routes and could be removed. The open spaces are largely unmanaged and have limited accessibility and are being built on already. Surveys have not followed good practice. Desk studies have limited.
Our next Sarah is Sarah. Our next speaker, sorry, is Sarah.
Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm a resident of MacArthur Drive. The UK government has committed on a world stage to achieve net zero by 2050 and pledged 239 million at COP29 3 weeks ago to halt and reverse the catastrophic impact of deforestation. The planning application considered tonight directly contravenes government pledges and what we know about the severe damage caused by destruction of trees and wildlife habitat. The UK government sets itself as a role model for addressing climate change, yet we are here looking at a local proposal that completely undermines this. The circumstances are not exceptional to warrant the destruction of trees, and the planned offset loss of mature trees by planting saplings is completely at odds with what we know about mature trees' role in absorption of CO2. When mature trees are cut down, tons of CO2 is released into our atmosphere. Kings Hill is already reported to have one of the worst CO2 consumption rates in the country. If approved, this plan will vastly exacerbate the existing problem. Radon levels are a concern in Kings Hill. Digging up soil needlessly could cause higher risk of lung cancer for neighbouring residents and residents of the proposed dwellings. The plan is extremely bad for the local climate, adults and child health. The developers' reports don't include the presence of protected English bluebells, which are an indication of ancient woodland. The area is referred to as a brownfield. This isn't accurate. Maps contradict this, and seeing the area with the naked eye, walking through the woods, hearing the birds, and admiring the carpet of bluebells confirms its identity. It's woodland. The proposal is in direct contravention with Tunbridge Moorland Borough Council own policy document Managing Development and the Environment, page 39, paragraph 2A and B, which state, development that would result in the net loss or deterioration of woodland will only be permitted if all of the following tests are met. Development cannot reasonably be located on an alternative site, or the need for development clearly outweighs any harm which may be caused to the ecological, archaeological and landscape value of the woodland. There are 226 Bellway homes on Kings Hill that aren't selling. Despite prices being reduced several times, surely this is a strong indication that demand for more housing in this area doesn't exist. There are many empty business buildings on Kings Hill, some vacant for 3 years. A survey on the 4th of December 2024 confirmed a whopping 218,736 square foot of dormant business space. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Chloe.
As previously raised in the objections of thousands of people, first and foremost, the area, whilst it may be termed brownfield in the application, is woodland. Any small pockets of former military use have long been demolished, and the area is now being reclaimed by nature. The area is seen from images in the reports on this application, aerial views, or by simply walking down the bridle path, is woodland. It is full of trees, hedges, and plants with extensive wildlife, including protected species. The area is dense, so much so that you could not simply walk through it. It is also home to thousands of protected bluebells which carpet it throughout spring. The MPPF 2023 paragraph 186 states that development resulting in the loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitat should be refused unless there is wholly exceptional circumstances. This development requires the loss of heathland, trees, damage to the ecosystem, loss of irreplaceable habitat, is adjacent to ancient woodland, which will also be damaged by the building. Furthermore, the proposed development cannot be described in any form as exceptional. Paragraph 5.3.35 in the ecological report confirms hazel dormice are throughout the site, a creature which has seen a 70% decrease in its population due to development in recent years, along with species of bat, a good slowworm population, and other reptiles, including adders. As I'm sure you're aware, these are European protected species and are protected under the Conservation of Habitats and Species Regulations of 2017, which states it is an offence to deliberately kill, injure, disturb, or capture them, damage or destroy their breeding sites and resting places, possess, control, or transport them. It is also an offence under the Wildlife and Countryside Act of 1981 to intentionally or recklessly disturb any of these creatures while they occupy a structure, such as a tree, or place used for shelter or protection, or to obstruct their access to a place of shelter or protection. This Act also provides protection to many birds in the woods, including owls, jays, woodpeckers, and more, making it an offence as above. In addition, these woods also host migratory species such as deer, which use the woodland as corridors between bedding and feeding sites. Deer corridors are under threat throughout the country, resulting in deer interacting with the human population. This has become more evident in Kings Hill already, with deer straying onto the roads in recent years. Thousands of different creatures cannot simply be ushered into a small corner of their habitat, and given the laws and regulations in place, it would be impossible to even break ground on the proposed entrance to the site without committing an offence. Vitally, it is also noted throughout your reports, namely 7.46, that the eco surveys provided are now out of date. Some are over 6 years old. How can you be expected to make such crucial decisions in the face of thousands of objections with outdated and inaccurate reports? The community has spoken out in force against this development with over 4,000 objections. For the sake of the residents, vital woodland and wildlife, I'd like you to take this opportunity to decline this wholly unsuitable development.
Thank you. We now have Kizzy Cockrell. Yeah, now turn it back.
I am a resident on Clearheart Lane and strongly oppose this application, along with over 1,400 people who objected. 2 petitions have been signed with over 3,960 objections. This demonstrates the weight of local opposition. The application is highly controversial. The impact on residents on Clearheart Lane, Charlotte Drive and MacArthur Drive is severe. The change and loss of character of the area from an open and wooded space will have a detrimental visual impact on residents and loss of privacy. The proposal to widen Clearheart Lane will cause structural damage to properties, land instability, subsidence, heave, landslip and the risk and safety of residents. Using heavy excavation equipment will have dire consequences on the root system of the trees and foundations of nearby properties. There is potential for invasive non-native plants to be disturbed, for example, Japanese knotweed. Residents will be exposed to unacceptable construction traffic, noise, smell, traffic emissions and pollution during construction and after development. This will harm the mental health of local residents and their standard of living. Paragraph 173 of the MPPF 2023 stipulates flood risk must not be increased. There is a major concern over the quality and quantity of drainage and water management, as the site is on a gradient. Therefore, flood risk will impact on neighbouring properties. Contaminated land reports should be requested now due to the military history of the site and possible contaminants in the ground, including heavy metals, hydrocarbons and asbestos, a severe health risk to residents. Undisturbed grenades may also be present and cause damage to life and property. Again, there is no mention of bluebells protected under Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, and the Woodland Trust have confirmed they have not been reconsulted on this application since their original objection in May 2021. In line with paragraph 12, TNBC should encourage positive development, creating places, streets and spaces which meets the needs of people, visually attractive, safe, accessible, functional and inclusive, and must maintain and improve their local character. This does not protect and enhance the quality, character and amenity value. The Human Rights Act 1998, Protocol 1, Article 1 states that a person has a right to a peaceful enjoyment of their possessions, including their home and other land. Article 8 of the Act states a person has a substantive right to respect for their private and family life. Private and family life, therefore, encompasses not only the home, but the surrounding area, including this woodland. The adverse impacts of granting planning permission is severe. Please object to this application. We request you refuse it.
Thank you. Next, we have Peter Cockrell.
I am a resident and will explain the impact on access. This application for development should be refused. Based on paragraph 115 of the National Planning Policy Framework of 2023, this states that the development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe. Policy SQ8 states that the development proposals will only be permitted where they would not significantly harm highway safety. We say that the removal of the emergency access
proposed widening and sole access through Clearheart Lane imposes a significant highway safety hazard. Paragraph 7.12 and 7.13 make reference to the proposal to widen Clearheart Lane and introduce passing points. These are not welcomed. We say that removing the grass verges, removing the trees will change the function of what is now a one-way road through traffic, will be dominated by heavy and unnecessary traffic. This will create a severe public safety hazard. It could also damage properties, land instability, cause subsidence, heave and landslip. With reference to paragraphs 3.1 and 3.2 of the report, the application here is not isolated to just a development for 65 dwellings, and consideration must be given for the future use of all land joining this proposed development, including Area 1F, which we've heard about before, and the stables, which increases those using Clearheart Lane beyond what it was intended for. Paragraph 7.21 of the report refers to designated off-street parking. This is not correct. Council are aware that numerous cars park around Clearheart Lane and on Clearheart Lane, especially since the introduction of double yellow lines. We say that proposed access over the established bridleway is simply dangerous. It will be dangerous for pedestrians, and those include the elderly, school children, cyclists and horse riders. We say that the construction access for industrial vehicles and machinery through Clearheart Lane is heavily objected. We say that this would pose a further danger for those using it. To conclude, we say that access through Clearheart Lane on this proposed development is not suitable, and it will pose a danger to public safety and indeed to life. So therefore, to conclude, in the strongest and most respectful way, I'm asking you as the council to refuse this application.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Ms. Dennis Pope.
I'm a planning director of Litchfield's planning consultancy, and I've been advising Tregothnan Estates on this site for nearly 6 years. I've also helped in preparing the planning application proposals before you. It was in fact lodged 3.5 years ago, and obviously it's taken some time to and whilst there has been a delay, it has allowed the applicant to address all of the technical issues rising, topology, highways, trees. There are no objections now from any of the statutory. The officer's report is comprehensive, running to 45 pages and recommending 32 planning conditions. All of these conditions have been agreed with the applicant. In terms of the planning determination this evening, the starting point is, of course, to recognise that this site is allocated. The site is not in the countryside, it's not greenbelt, it's within the settlement boundary, and it is allocated 65 dwellings. The exact number that is now being. Whilst I can fully appreciate that residents may not be supportive of these proposals, we operate in a plan-led system, and therefore Section 38(6) of the Planning Act requires that the planning decision should be in accordance with the adopted development plan policy. If we turn to the housing supply position, we can see there is further good reason to grant planning permission. The latest TNBC figures suggest that the 5-year housing supply has deteriorated further to only 3.97 years. Poor delivery of housing in this borough over the last 3 years means that there is a 20% buffer now needs to be added to the 5-year supply requirement. Under the new housing targets brought in earlier in the year, it was reported that TNBC's housing requirement will increase further by an additional 446 dwellings a year. Members may have seen in today's press that the new NPPF has now been published. Our initial review suggests that housing requirement in this borough will increase further. Inevitably, this will require greenbelt land to be used.
All of this means that TMVC is very vulnerable to speculative housing coming forward, as a tilted balance would apply. This vulnerability will potentially increase with the new PMPF. Our clients' proposals are not speculative development. They will help deliver an allocated housing site. They will help avoid the need to allocate 65 dwellings in the Greenbelt. We therefore commend the officer's comprehensive assessment to you and the recommendation.
Thank you. Right. Okay, we will now move on to councillors who would like to debate, and I'd like to call Councillor Brown to start our discussion.
Well, good evening, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much for bringing this to the committee tonight, and thank you to the officer for preparing this very detailed report. I mean, we've been talking or looking at this site for quite some time, and just looking at the planning history, as the agent just mentioned, it has been submitted before and withdrawn, I think going back to 2011, and then it was submitted last year, about this time last year. I was expecting it around about Christmas time, and it didn't materialise, and it's finally come before us tonight. And reference has been made to the development document of 2005. So I have a little question about that. And not many of us were around in 2005 on this council, but I had a look online at the document that went to the Planning and Transportation Committee, and it listed a number of sites around the borough, including this one. But on the document, it just mentioned F1, I think it was, 65 houses at Kings Hill. There was no map on that document. There was no mention of what the topography of the site was. And there was no differential between the Kings Hill development. And just for members' awareness, this is not part of the Kings Hill joint development. This is outside of the Kings Hill development, on a piece of land adjacent to it. So whereas before we've been talking about planning applications here, it's all within the agreed outline planning consent. This is separate to it. So I would forgive members, and I don't remember being at that meeting actually, but I would forgive members for missing the point that this is quite a different piece of land. The vast majority of Kings Hill is being built on the airfield, which is, grass, open land. And as I think you've been to the site, and those of us that went to the site visit a few weeks ago, it's distinctly different to the rest of the Kings Hill development. It's full of wildlife, full of trees and shrubs. And when you looked at the illustration that the officer put forward in her presentation, you'll see that it's a big carbuncle on the side of the existing built development. So how we can actually say that it's part of the community, I really don't see that at all. It's a big chunk out of the surrounding countryside. So I would like perhaps some further sort of advice really on how much weight we need to put onto the DPD document of 2005, okay, because it seems to me that the council may have made a mistake or had not been given the full information at the time it decided to adopt that. Because, as I say, there's a significant difference between the rest of Kings Hill and that piece of land. Now, subsequent to that decision, we've had Kings Hill Phase 3, which was a switch from commercial land to residential, and we agreed that, and 635 additional houses. In Kings Hill Phase 5, which we actually objected to, and we lost that on appeal, as another 350 houses were done a couple of years ago. So since that document was produced and agreed by the Planning and Transportation Committee, we've granted planning permission for another 1,000 houses. So the initial concept of the garden village of 250 houses is now about 2,500 houses. And this piece of land has been sitting there sort of waiting to get to a planning committee. And one of the reasons it looks to me like it's a very complicated planning application, and I congratulate the officer for drawing together all of these points and coming forward with a document or a report that actually recommends planning improvement, because there's so many conditions in this. I don't think I've seen a more complicated planning application for Kings Hill in my entirety that I've been here. There's 32 planning conditions to make this a compliant application. It involves the removal of 30 trees plus a additional clump of trees, so probably over 30 trees for 65 houses. So this site's been very difficult to manage to get through to approval. Talks about moderate bat activity in the site. So I'd just like to explore the bat activity research that's been done, because I might come back to the bats at a later stage. Talks about nesting birds and breeding birds living there. Dormice are present as well, which is a protected species, and there's a number of mitigation strategies that have had to be put into place to be able to cope with those. And there's also slow worms and lizards, and bearing in mind our recent application nearby, there are no badgers, otherwise we'd have a complete set to look forward to tonight. So it's a really complex plan application, and I thank the officer for a very comprehensive report, but I'm not quite convinced yet. I agree with the recommendations. So a few questions. So the question first is, how close is this development from its nearest point to the ancient woodland, which is actually on the map? And also, I'd like to know what research or evidence has been provided to ensure that the site doesn't actually meet the criteria of ancient woodland, because just because it's not designated as ancient woodland doesn't necessarily mean it isn't, because it's quite complicated, bearing in mind it has to go back so many hundred years. Has any research been done on the tithe maps, for example, down at Maidstone to indicate whether or not, or what was there in the past? And for my knowledge, it's been a fairly dormant site. When we were on site looking at it, there wasn't any evidence of any structures there. Other parts of Kings Hill have pillboxes going back to World War II and the RAF base, Picket Hamilton, gun platforms, or even hard standings. Now, you mentioned that there are some hard standings. So the question there is, as a percentage of the overall site, and I didn't see any hard standings remaining, but as a percentage of the overall site, how much was the hard standing? You know, are we talking about 5%? Or have we got any rough idea of what would be there to indicate prior use? I don't agree with the plan officer's point that it forms part of the Kings Hill settlement, because as you can see from the map, it's bolted on the side of the Kings Hill development, and it's not part of that original planning application. What else? I appreciate other members want to come in, so I might sort of cut this short and allow others to speak, but there's a few questions there for you. Members of the public have quite rightly pointed out that the X1 and X2, which was in service quite a while, has been withdrawn because the funding ran out. So apart from peak times when children are going to school and coming back in the evenings, bus transport isn't very good here, and you are required to have a car, really. Talk in the report of the buffer, the woodland buffer. So I think I've read it, that one part mentions 15 metres, another part mentions 10 metres. I just need some clarity on, are we having a 15 or a 10 metre boundary? I note that the Woodland Trust objects. They consider the buffer zone, buffer area is not sufficient size for this development. And I agree with the Woodland Trust's expert advice on that. I think the potential impact on the surrounding ancient woodland and the semi-natural woodland in the area could be a sticking point too, because it's not just during it's not just the fact that we've been told there's no ancient woodland on the site. There is ancient woodland all around it, and the construction phase, and then when people move in, will have an ongoing impact on the environment, the ancient woodland that sits around it. Just a little bit technical. Paragraph 1.36 of the National Policy Framework states that trees make an important contribution to the character and quality of urban environments, and also help mitigate and adapt to climate change. And I couldn't really agree with that policy more. It seems to me a bit strange that we are departing from that, knocking down 30 plus trees in order to build 65 houses. So I'm not quite sure how that fits in. And also, I mean, I think Councillor Tanner's going to talk about access, but Kent Design Guide does state and recommend emergency access for network resilience. Now, when we've looked at this previously, there was emergency access. Now, we didn't really like that emergency access because the travel distances, should it be needed, were very excessive. So this one's come back with a different proposal, but I like it even less. So Clearheart Lane already has a reasonable number of dwellings on it, and it's not a through route. So and we saw the park cars on Clear Hart Lane. There are no parking restrictions there, and I wouldn't feel it would be fair on the existing residents for us as a parking authority to put parking restrictions on there just to make sure that access to this site is available at all times. So I appreciate there has been some work done with Kent Fire and Rescue and the planning the highways people to make this compliant, but I think Councillor Tanner's going to talk about a sinkhole that we actually have right now on an adjacent site. So I'm going to leave it there and hand it over and look forward to some of those answers later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on some of those questions? Okay. Yep.
I can't comment on the 2005 because wasn't there. I would presume that the 2008 needed that. Adopted. So James, and bat and dormice are discussed in the report. County Ecology have noted that you need assistance for the dormice. I think there are which will cover bits and pieces for the bats and the dormice, etc. And they've raised no objection. How close is it to the adjacent woodland? It is adjacent. The site is actually adjacent to it, but there will be a 15-metre buffer by England. I think that is demonstrated in the indicative layout as well. Hard standing, I can't afraid. It was notable on site. It stand on a tiny bit of hard standing, but obviously, as you say, it is quite prone now. Whether there's any more hard standing under that, I'm sorry, I can't answer that question. I'd have to. Trees, yes, there are 30 trees coming out. Obviously, it's been assessed by our tree officer. It was also assessed in 2021, originally when it came. That's when the TPO orders were placed. Various trees that we considered were required to stay. But it has been assessed recently, like for trees on. There's also a comment in the report about the tree officer considers that the tree replacement could be 1 for 2. So 1 tree out, 2 trees back. Side, obviously. Emergency access, yes, I mean, we have organised for a committee on emergency access. It is only guidance, has been removed because of the implications it would have had on Bing Lane. Kent County Council, whilst they would like to see it, did do the access without a emergency access, and we've obviously negotiated with fire in regard to making sure it is being mitigated against that there isn't an.
Thank you. Is that okay, Councillor Brown?
Just go back on the bats, Madam Chairman. So when we looked at previous sites around here, the normal approach in the circumstances would be carry out 3 emergent surveys with at least 2 within the period of May to August. So is that compliant with, as our bat survey compliant with that?
I would presume it must be because Kent County Council, the ecology did come back 2 or 3 times with an objection. Obviously, they were satisfied perhaps on the last survey, which then moved their objections to.
Thank you. Councillor Tanner.
Thank you, Chair. As a Cabinet Member for Housing, I'm very aware of the need for additional housing in our area. However, everything that's been said tonight is absolutely correct. As a resident, I can wholly confirm that the infrastructure around our area cannot cope with it anymore. We have a doctor's surgery that is stretched beyond belief. You know, it is so hard to access a doctor in Kings Hill. And it can only get worse with the development that's being proposed here. We have a lot of commuters that live in Kings Hill, and these people are unable to park at the station, even though we've got 3 separate car parks down there. But our shuttle bus was taken away. and so we have no choice but to use the car. With that said, traffic issues are becoming more frequent, and I think we'll all have seen over the last 2 weeks how we have come to a standstill in Kings Hill simply because there's been some roadworks going on the A228, but also we had a tree down in Tower View, and that has led to the road needing to be closed. And so we have been left with one exit from the development. And quite frankly, I've sat in it for so long over the last 2 weeks that I am totally fed up with it. And this is not an infrequent event. This happens all the time. As Councillor Brown said, we've currently got an issue in Avion Gardens because there is a sinkhole appeared there. And there's currently some work going on to put that right. But because Avion Gardens is a bit of a similar development to what's being proposed here tonight, in so much as it's a cul-de-sac in effect, and there is only one way in and one way out, part of that road has had to be closed off, and they've had to mitigate by using the green verges to allow people to get into their homes. I mean, the access is impossible right now. And most importantly, I have had really grave concerns from the outset with this development proposal concerning the access for emergency vehicles. And I know that officers have to be guided by emergency services. I completely understand that. But to anyone who knows this vicinity really well, it's very clear that the safety of residents who would possibly choose to live in this development, their safety is going to be compromised significantly. But if we were to go back to an earlier slide of the presentation, it showed the entrance up Clearheart Lane into the only entrance into this development, and there were parked cars on both sides of the road. How a fire engine is going to get through there, I really do not know. And I don't want the blood of those people on my hands. So I want it out there that I have objected to this on safety grounds from the outset. I moved to Kings Hill in early 2001 when it was an idyllic, stress-free, award-winning development. And I've watched it change over the years, and it's now a very different area. So for all of those reasons, I'd like to propose that this committee refuses this application because the proposed development in size and means of access would cause increased levels of vehicular activity along Clearheart Lane, giving rise to noise and disturbance being harmful to existing residents in the area. Additionally, the access for emergency vehicles is a major cause of concern, and despite the guidance from Kent Fire and Rescue Service and KCC, I cannot agree to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have a seconder for your proposal?
Madam Chairman, I'm quite happy to second that, but I'd like to just explore some of the other points, and I might even row in behind that with something else. So would you mind just holding on for a little while?
Hold on for a minute. Anybody else like to speak? Councillor Crisp.
Right, yeah, hi. Being the only Green councillor here, it's music to my ears to hear everything that you said tonight, and spoken in defence of the environment, which I obviously wholeheartedly agree with, and very eloquently put. I mean, it takes 7 mature trees for each person in this room to breathe for a year, and so removing any trees is disastrous. So it's brilliant that that has been sort of spoken about tonight. Because I sometimes think we know better than the illegal loggers and gold miners of the Amazon for basically deforesting basically the lungs of the world. So, you know, we've got to put our own house in order to expect the rest of the world to do that. So, yeah, I'm really pleased. The government policy, I think is fundamentally wrong. And in this borough, we need to build 16,500 houses, which is primarily green belt. So that's going to be a real battle. And all of my advice would be is to sort of group together with all the other protest groups, all the applications that are going in at the moment, to actually sort of respond to the government to say, you know, the policy is wrong. It needs re-looking at. So I'd like to leave it there, and I'm obviously against it.
Thank you. Councillor Borton.
Thank you very much. I regret if Councillor Crisp hasn't seen the revised National Planning Policy Framework today that the government haven't listened to him. That's not a surprise with this government, but then I didn't vote for them. And they have proceeded with asking boroughs like Tunbridge and Moorland and many boroughs across the country to build houses far in excess of what I think is sustainable for a borough like ours. So I very much regret that that's the approach that the government have taken. However, we sit on a planning committee tonight, and it's a point that members will have heard me make frequently, but we have people with us tonight who probably haven't been to one of these meetings before, so I shall just articulate my usual points around this again. Our job here tonight isn't to vote in favour of whether we like something or don't like something. We are a regulatory committee, and we can only make our decisions based on planning guidance, planning law, and national and local planning policy that have been put in place. Whether we agree with that national or local planning policy, it is neither here nor there. We are a regulatory committee, and we must stick to the regulation. So while I have sympathy with the points that Councillor Crisp makes, I would urge him to consider the fact that we are on a regulatory committee tonight, and that is what we should be judging this application against. And I think it's an important point to make. Otherwise, we give members of the public a false expectation about what this committee can and can't do. The other point I would make, which again I seem to be making at regular committees, is that a group of people that we didn't hear in any of the public representations are the families that are in urgent need of accommodation across Tunbridge and Moorland, who are currently, we all are paying for them in temporary accommodation at the moment, and they have a local connection to Kings Hill and the surrounding area. So it's absolutely right that we increase the supply of housing in Kings Hill and the surrounding communities, because we owe it to these people. These are the most vulnerable people in our community, to provide them with housing options going forward. And I note that this application is policy compliant when it comes to affordable housing. So I don't want that to be lost. However, that doesn't mean that we have to accept every proposal that comes before us. And there are a couple of interesting things for me about this application, and that were mentioned in the public speeches. I'm just going to focus on one for the meantime, because I'd like to hear what other members say, and that's about ancient woodland. So one of the public speakers, I think it was Mr. Hart, referenced the Amber Lane appeal of a few years ago. So I've just been doing some research into the decision that that this council took at the time. I wasn't on the committee in 2019 around the Amber Lane appeal that was subsequently upheld by the planning inspectorate. All the others, we lost all of the others, but we won this particular one. And paragraph 92 of that particular appeal decision, I don't expect officers to know this, I don't think any of our planning officers were here at the time that this went through, said that for the above reasons, I conclude that on the issue that the woodlands known as Warren Wood, on and adjacent to the site, and I'll come back to why I think that's important in a minute, comprises ancient woodland, and that the proposed development would result in loss or deterioration of parts of it through the creation of the emergency vehicle access in accordance with paragraph 175C of the framework. There basically that is a reason to refuse the application. That application was refused. Now, today we had the revised National Planning Policy Framework, which I've also just been looking at after hearing that in the remarks, and paragraph 193C is that development resulting in the loss of deterioration of irreplaceable habitats, and in brackets, such as ancient woodland, should be refused unless there are wholly exceptional reasons and a suitable compensation strategy exists. It then has a footnote 70, in which it says seeks to define a wholly exceptional reason. There's, for example, infrastructure projects, including nationally significant infrastructure projects, where the public benefit would clearly outweigh the loss or deterioration of the habitat. Now, on this application specifically, I note, and if you just bear with me while I get this, I'm looking at 6.3 of the committee report. that the site is adjacent to the greenbelt and ancient woodland. So it's not, there's, as far as I'm aware, please correct me if I'm wrong, there's no ancient woodland on the site, but this is adjacent to it. But the revised National Planning Policy Framework makes it clear that ancient woodland is a irreplaceable habitat still, despite all of the other disasters in the revised National Planning Policy Framework. And obviously we've got that precedent up at Amber Lane. Now there's a 15-metre buffer proposed, which basically, my understanding is, on the feedback of the statutory consultees, is considered suitable to overcome those concerns about ancient woodland. So, getting to the question, I just would really appreciate some sort of view from officers as to why our recommendation seeks to suggest that that 15-metre buffer is enough to overcome the concerns about ancient woodland, when we do have some quite strong national policy guidance that ancient woodland can be considered an irreplaceable habitat. I might come back later on in the debate on a few other things, but I think that's quite an important point to get to the nub of the application, so I'd be interested to hear more. Thank you.
Okay, would you like to come back that on?
Okay, the MPPF that you refer to does sort of talk about woodland being lost. There's obviously no loss of ancient woodland at all on this site because it's it. And the buffer of 15 metres is statutory consultee's recommendation, which is what the site will adhere to. So there shouldn't be any harm to the ancient woodland. A, it's not on the site. B, there be the required buffer between that and the development.
Thank you. I have some other councillors would like to speak. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I've been involved in planning at a parish and borough level for over 20 years. I know some of my colleagues have been at it for even longer than that. In those days, we had the flexibility to refuse an application like this. But over the years, our hands have become tied by government rules. We've slowly been whittled away our power. And now, however much we feel for what you're saying, and we all agree with it, I live in a village too. I walk in the woods. But so these things do concern me. But our hands are tied unless we have material planning considerations that we can refuse this application on. We can't refuse it, or it goes to appeal and we will end up with costs of hundreds of thousands of pounds. And that hundreds of thousands of pounds is your money and my money. So much as I regret it, I think I'm going to have to vote against it. Against it. 1 minute, let's get this the right way around. I'm going to have to vote for approval. I want to vote for against it. That's why I stumbled. The other fact is, I want to chuck into the mix. People talk about lack of infrastructure, schools, surgeries, buses. That is all true, but that's endemic. That's everywhere. It's not just on that little bit of Kings Hill. It's everywhere. We've done some work getting buses for Borough Green and West Malling and Narkfield and Maidstone, and that's a parish working. But you're not going to get them from KCC or the government or the developer. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Roud.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to say, Councillor Taylor's already said some of the things that I was going to say, especially about infrastructure and so on. And while I fully agree with almost everything we've heard tonight, I could elaborate a bit on the structures on the site. It's about 30% was actually hard standing. One of my passions is old maps of our borough, and I have some old maps of the airfield when it was in operation. There were six loading, or sorry, not loading bays, but 6 protective bays for fighter aircraft on that bay. Now, if you can imagine yourself, let's say a Spitfire, because everybody knows what they look like. They weren't actually based there, but there are a similar size aircraft that was based there. There were 6 of those spread out on that site with blast walls between each aircraft to protect them from bomb damage, which everybody's been speaking about. So in actual fact, I've looked at it, it's about 30% of it was concrete at one time or another. Now, they're not there now. They were there till about 1970-ish, maybe. I remember actually sheltering in one of those while it was raining at one of the Westmoreland air shows. So I do remember them well. Anyway, aside from that, we hear about Amber Lane. One of the things, access on that, and it was because the actual access into that site was longer than Clearheart. We've heard a lot about emergency access tonight. If there was an emergency access or another access, if this site was accepted and approved, would only produce more traffic through Clearheart Lane, aiming for the Water and Bury Road. Now, since Kings Hill was first put on the table, there's always been moves to get access onto the Water and Bury Road, which has been objected to by every parish on that side, on the eastern side of Kings Hill. That's Eastmoreland, Teesson and Water and Bury. None of them want access because through Water and Bury Road is also chaos at the moment anyway. And as for getting out of Kings Hill because there was some roadworks or a tree down, you can't legislate for that. Trees come down all over the place. We had one down in Winterfield Lane in Eastmoreland the day before yesterday. Roads were chaos. But this happens. Roadworks happen. I think the one that caused a major problem last week was a water leak. We can't legislate for that either. So these things do happen. I'm pleased with the drawings that there is no access onto Teesson Road for those exact reasons. I think it's good that the woodland at the north and south of it has been decided to leave that. And there's a boundary on the eastern edge, which is it's substantial hedging or whatever. I think that could be improved. It needs to be a bit more than substantial because we have got nesting birds up there and wildlife that will use that hedge as protection. We know that there's a deficit in land supply and housing. We had a very similar exercise last week at Eastmoreland, which had very, very similar views with traffic, infrastructure, schools, emergency access, and we approved it because we don't have, as Councillor Taylor said, we don't have really a proper objection that we can refuse it. We are almost told we have to do this. The tilted balance tells us that. Kent Police, I noted in their report, suggested 12 points that should be addressed. A lot of it was about crime, and they included a suitable gate at Kettridge Lane. That's now irrelevant because it's not actually on the development, not planned on the development. But all the other points, I think, they were really good. We've heard that parking in Clearheart Lane could cause a problem, but hey ho, anywhere you drive around in this borough, you find parking's a problem. Try and get through Hadlow. Try and get through Hadlow. Try and get up Eastmoreland High Street. We've had fire engines up High Street in Eastmoreland stuck on emergency route because they can't get up there. Again, this happens all over the borough. It's not unique to Kings Hill. Sorry, I've just lost me way again there. Yeah, say we've had emergency vehicles in Eastmoreland Village which use the Water and Bury Road to go to Water and Bury from Larkfield Fire Station, and they've been stopped in the high street because of traffic. So it's not unique by any stretch of the imagination. And the fire brigade cope with it admirably. There was another one I recall about maybe 6 years ago. I'm sure other members here were on the council at the time. There was a development in Ditton, in New Road Ditton, that was objected to on fire brigade issues, and the fire brigade Act from Larkford actually took an appliance down there and proved that they could get it through the gap. So while I sympathise, I really can't see how we have any proper objections to refuse it. I think I'm predisposed to agree with this, but I could be swayed if somebody came up with the right objections. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
Thank you, Chairman. I wanted to speak more with my KCC hat on than a borough at the moment, specifically with regard to the X1, X2 buses, which were funded through Section 106 contributions. When that funding expired, I pressed Kent Highways bus department to try and find how much it would cost to keep that bus service going. And the answer was £250,000 every year. And that's because the route was completely unviable. There were insufficient people using it to justify it. I've had representations more recently from people asking if that can be reinstated. Obviously, KCC is not a bus operator. That's down to a private company, Arriva. So I've directed their responses to them to ask if they would consider doing it. And unfortunately, the answer is no, because of all the cost implications, the driver costs, fuel costs, trying to get spare parts for buses, etc. Additionally, whenever a big development like this takes place, there is always, as noted in 5.14, strategic development. So this is effectively our Section 106 contributions that are requested by KCC to help them cover some of the costs that they anticipate will be needed for developments. Now, KCC gets an awful lot of money in through council tax. Of that money, 74% is spent on 3% of the population. It's spent on adult social care and children's social care. So the 97% of us who are not involved in children's or adult social care get the remaining 26%. And that's supposed to keep your waste recycling centres open, your libraries open, the 8 zillion potholes filled. To get every single pothole filled in Kent would cost over £800 million. To get every single drain that is currently blocked would take over 10 years to fill, to unblock, to work. And that is working 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. KCC is bust. We have no money. We cannot afford to provide the services that we have to do. And we are having to find £90 million worth of savings just to keep our heads above water at the moment. So when it comes to large developments like this and this Section 106 money, so to suddenly be given 700 grand to help fund purchase of land for a secondary school, KCC needs that money to be able to provide the infrastructure that we all know is lacking. For instance, with Kings Hill Phase 3, there is over £400,000 that has still not been spent from Phase 3. And that's solely for the Integrated Care Board, also known as Clinical Commissioning Group. And that money can only be spent on the Westmoreland Group practice and Waterbury surgeries to provide additional facilities and doctors for that. Now, we all know how difficult it is to see a doctor. You have to anticipate 6 weeks in advance you're going to be sick and get an appointment just on the off chance that you might actually be prophetic and you are ill. But we've got that money sitting there that, despite my regular meetings with the practice managers, we are not utilising that money because the ICB has other ideas for it. I don't know what they are, but there we go. So with everything that's going on, I don't like this application one iota. The only upside is, as Councillor Rowd has pointed out, that the emergency exit is no longer coming out onto the Waterbury Road, because Rouse Kent, at the time that the planning application was originally provided, signed a legal document with Waterbury Parish Council that I represent on the borough here, that they would never have any road access out of Kings Hill through to Wateringbury. So going through what we have here, as others have said, if we refuse this application, which I would love to be able to do, it will then be appealed and it will go to the planning inspectorate. Because we haven't got a 5-year land supply, because the new guidance that have come out today on the NPPF, because we are expected to somehow miraculise 69,000 houses per year in the southeast. God knows where we're going to get the bricks from, let alone the bricklayers. And it's going to cost the council money to defend that. We will get allocated the cost of the developer because they will win. And we will have zero opportunity to have all these advisories and additional requests. So we lose complete control of this planning application. So you're actually caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. We've got an application that we don't want, but if we refuse it, it'll happen anyway. And if it happens anyway, we have zero control over how it happens. So that's the predicament that we are in as a council, and we are in here sitting. Do we take a risk and refuse it and then have it foisted upon us as it happened with phase 5? Or do we try and take some control over it and make sure that we can steer it to our best advantage in the knowledge that we have no option, but it's coming down the line at some stage? Or we could all go and emigrate. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, you are next on my list, but I've got a couple of, would you like to come back at the end? Or do you want to speak now? You're next on my list, but there are a couple of other people who like to speak. Don't come to the end. Okay. So could I have Councillor Thornywell, please?
Thank you very much. First of all, I must say I'm not a member of your committee and I can't vote, but I did want to draw out some things and at least for the benefit of the public, get some answers to them. I do have concerns about this application and the aspect of ancient woodland. I actually went along to the public inquiry concerning Amber Lane, and my recollection was that it was refused because of the impact on ancient woodland. None of the officers here were at that public inquiry, but I spoke at the public inquiry, and I remember the so-called expert that the appellant brought along claimed it wasn't ancient woodland in this area, and I was concerned about that. Our planning officer at the time was concerned, and it turned out that the so-called expert had looked at the tithe map and clearly he couldn't read a tithe map because he got it upside down as to the north and south, because the tithe maps don't have north at the top like modern maps. So overnight it was taken out as an ancient woodland and then put back in by Natural England. So we left the inquiry. Now the point in making this is ancient woodland only what Natural England say is ancient woodland, or do we have any responsibility ourselves to consider whether any of this site is ancient woodlands? That's my first thing I'd like to bring out. Secondly, people have made comments about possible unexploded ordnance. I think that was the correct word. Is that an issue that is supposed to be examined under condition 14 of contaminated land? Thirdly, members of the public have said this is not a brownfield site. And certainly I didn't come on the site inspection, but I've been up there and I recall there's lots of concrete and so forth. But I think we have a list of brownfield sites, do we not? And may I ask if it's on there? And the other thing, really, this is all linked, and I think just to say to members, as I read what the government are proposing, not in what they issued today, but beyond that, this is a site that's in an existing local plan duly approved. And if what they propose goes through, this is the last time this committee will ever consider outline applications for things which are in local plans. And it will be delegated by the government directly to officers to decide those applications. Now, I think that's totally wrong. And with respect, who the hell elects the officers? But that could be the position. And then there's a thread running through all these recent applications, and I still think this is different to the Clare Lane. I think there were grounds to refuse Clare Lane. This one, I struggle to see any that's likely to be held up on appeal. But members of the public are always making comments, and I have sympathy with this, with regard to the international obligations that our government have entered into and other legislation about climate change and biodiversity. And I listened to the debate, and some of the MPs have picked up on this point, that biodiversity and those issues and protecting species is running completely counter to both the existing and what's proposed in the new planning system. Sooner or later, someone with a pot of money is going to challenge one of these applications and go off to the High Court and the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, because there's a total dichotomy of thinking in the government and the previous government, all the governments, as between biodiversity is declining, and that's in complete contradiction of building all these houses, particularly in the countryside. And the other issue, which I would like some response from the officers, is frequently these planning applications we're receiving has got loads of information that's out of date about the buses and so forth. And I think we take the view that it's not our job to look at all these statements and draw out where they're wrong. Is that right? Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bailey, you wanted to speak as well?
I think if we can hand over to the officer just to deal with some of the questions coming out, and I'll come back on the ancient woodland one, if that's all right.
Back on the contaminated land one first, 14. No development approved by deal with the contamination prior to regard to the brownfield, well, it's not a green belt. It's within the settlement and it's not countryside land. It's had development on it before, so therefore it's a brown site, regardless of the fact it's got trees and everything on it. I think they were the only two that you actually asked questions, and then the other one was the ancient woodland, which
In terms of your ancient woodland issue, I mean, obviously, I've just been trying to look at my phone, but there's a lot of data to load up on my phone on ancient woodland. It's covered by the Ancient Woodland Inventory, which is obviously registered and run by Natural England. So there is a statutory register, but that was done through a desktop study analysis when it was first originally done. So, you know, I mean, as I said, there's a lot of data and my phone's not holding it, but, you know, that's, you know, and we transfer that onto our GIS system. And I've got a slide in there which shows that it's actually not within the ancient woodland area. So the site itself is not within the ancient woodland, but the protection, the buffer area, that 15-metre buffer is the standing advice from Natural England in terms of the distance between ancient woodland areas and to protect those areas from activity. I just thought I wanted to also come round in terms of what members are saying, because I just wanted, there are a couple of sort of key factors on this site, because obviously in terms of what members are actually considering, this site is a designated site in the adopted development plan, and as set out in paragraph 6.4 of your officer's report, that attracts very significant weight, because section 38(6) of the Planning Compulsory Purchase Act requires members to determine the application in accordance with the development plan unless material considerations indicate otherwise. Now, in terms of what you've heard from the officer, you know, you've had the MPPF launch today.
In effect, that has confirmed what the consultation, it hasn't changed significantly from what I can see in the consultation draft. The methodology that was proposed has been adopted on that basis. Our housing numbers have will increase effectively something in the region of 4,000 over the planned period. There's a significant number of housing that's coming our way over and above what was previously set out in the plan. Now, obviously, you're applying the tilted balance in terms of this on this application. Not only have you got an application that's in the development plan that's meant to contribute towards our housing supply. You've just heard that we've had to readjust our housing supply at 3.97. That is actually going downwards since the MPPF has just been launched today on the basis of that was based on old methodology. So actually with the new methodology, that 3.97 is probably going to have to be revisited again when we've number crunched those figures. So there's a lot of factors that are playing in this current application. And I know in terms of what's been proposed in terms of the access, I would also draw your attention to what the statutory consultees have said regarding the access, both KCC and both in what Kent Fire Rescue Service have said. And they've looked at that particular access and those comments are set out and they've raised no objection with the additional mitigation measures that have been set out. So in terms of what I've heard at the current time, there isn't a substantiated, in my view, a substantiated ground of refusal that's been suggested at this time, especially given all those matters and the tilted balance that members must apply to this application. And that's a high tilted balance, which is a significant and demonstrable tilted balance that you have to apply. Take that into account in terms of the recommendation that's been put forward at the current time. You know, where your statutory consultees have raised no objection and the officer has gone to lengths to speak to both Kent Fire and Rescue Service and at KCC to address those particular points, that I think members just have to sort of bear in mind that there's strong favour, a strong weight in favour of this application as set out on your papers. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, I know you do want to come in, but I'm holding you to the end, if that's all right. Yeah, are you happy with that, or would you like to come in now? No? Okay. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you very much. As I said earlier, there's a couple of other points that I'd like to come back on. So I'm very grateful that James asked that map be put up. Could I perhaps ask that it's zoomed in onto this site, please? Because I just think that would be very helpful.
For the members of the public, this is the proposals map. So this is an extract from our proposals map, which is available on our website, which shows our allocations from our adopted local plan. So effectively, just for members of the public, that's what we're showing on this. This proposal map shows constraints and allocations, and the highlighted area H1F is the site we're looking at, which is the proposed housing allocation in the DPD that's referred to in your documents. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, thank you for clarifying that, James. So I think there's a little bit of confusion around whether this is an allocated site or not. And I think a lot of that, as to how we got here, probably boils back to what Chris was saying earlier about the document from 2005 and then that feeding into the core strategy in 2008. So when this site was allocated, it in effect became part of, it in effect is a site that we would have expected to be brought forward during that plan period. For whatever reason, it wasn't. But when developing local plans, you look at obviously previously developed land first, and then you look at brownfield sites, and then you look at land that was previously allocated but hasn't been built out and doesn't have any particular constraint, for example, national landscape, ancient woodland, which obviously I appreciate we discussed, and greenbelt obviously being free amongst others. So even though what we might see as the current boundary of Kings Hill runs sort of to the end of Clearheart Lane where it is at the moment, in reality, the settlement boundary of Kings Hill includes this site. So we must sort of differentiate ourselves from what we see on the ground to what actually the case is in planning policy. And my understanding of the situation is that map demonstrates to us that this site is part of settlement confines of Kings Hill. So when we put together a local plan and the fact we don't have a local plan is, in my view, not down to the work of this council. We tried twice before. Once we were scuppered, in my view, unfairly, but it's history now, by the planning inspector. And then we were all ready to go back in July. And then the new government got in, and on day one of the new government said, hold on a sec, pause, guys. We want you to build all these houses that we really don't want to build. So we're sort of unfortunate in terms of where we've ended up. But when we're putting forward a local plan that we know has got an increased number of dwellings that we're going to have to find during the plan period, sites like this will score very highly in it. So I'm sorry to be unpopular in the room, but it is my strong view, my firm view, that this site will be developed at some point in the near future. The question for this committee tonight is whether this application is the right one for that. But I don't want, if this application is refused tonight, I really don't want anyone to go home and think this site will not be developed, because everything points towards this being exactly the sort of site that the government wants, like ours, to develop. A couple of other points that I'll sort of reference, and then I'll come on to the heart of the issue, because as well as ancient woodland, there's traffic concerns, as has been said. And I think I'm basically where Roger Round is on this application at the moment. I'm not quite sure. So I've got conflicting thoughts in my mind. Roadworks can happen. We know that having two accesses in and out of Kings Hill means that we've got a particular pinch point. My office is upstairs in this building, in the corner that overlooks the Silver Ball roundabout. And last week, when we had all the traffic problems, I could see it from my desk that queued down Tower View, queued up Forest Way, and throughout the day. And a couple of people came up to see me, external people, and they said, well, as leader of the council, what are you going to do about all of this traffic that's built up? And I had to very politely tell them that it was the county council's responsibility and not ours, which is sort of irritating, shall we say. So I've got complete sympathy with it. I've seen it all for myself, and I know how frustrating it is for residents on Kings Hill. I also know that we obviously want to make our developments as sustainable as possible. I think Sarah explained very well the problems with the bus services being removed, and that's because people on Kings Hill weren't using them, unfortunately, and consequently the X1 and X2 are no more. And obviously the public benefit that is referred to throughout the NPPF that is generated from Section 106 agreements and others is actually something that is used to outweigh some of the potential harm that is caused by planning applications. So it puts us in a really conflicting position. The other thing that's going through my mind is we're always told that where there are particular issues that we should look to condition them rather than use them as reasons to refuse. And as Chris said earlier, this is actually quite a complex planning application, and my hat goes off to Susan really for the work that she's done on it, because I appreciate she picked this up midway through. The conditions are very comprehensive. I was looking through them, and to be honest, I think that I think they all meet the tests, and I'm glad that we've got such strict conditions on the application. But of course, that kind of also explains that there are a number of different issues with it. So in addition to ancient woodland, the other thing that's caught my attention through the debate and through as public speakers is this issue around emergency access. And pages 32 and 33 in particular of the report really go into this in some detail. I do not understand what Kent Fire and Rescue have said and the process they've gone through in responding to this application. It seems that their position has changed multiple times, and we've now got to a situation in which there is agreement between the Kent Fire and Rescue Service and Kent County Council. So if this application is approved tonight, that those speakers and anyone who's concerned about emergency access, I would strongly encourage you and urge you to get in touch with Kent Fire and Rescue Service and ask what on earth they were doing in their responses to this application. Because it's just, it seems to me an inconsistent approach that they have taken throughout. But of course, obviously going back to the reasons for refusal, I note that one of them put forward was around this. And obviously it's hardly a convincing case that has been put because of the inconsistencies over time. So I still remain very undecided about this, to be honest. I think I can see the arguments both ways, but I would be interested in officers' views about Kent Fire and Rescue, particularly if Susan was involved in some of those latter discussions, because I must be honest, I'm a little bit confused by the approach that they've taken.
Thank you. you like to come back?
Yes,
Could you go close to your mic, because we are having people online saying they can't hear you.
Okay, that question that you just put, I actually have asked that to Kent Fire. And this won't be very popular, their response, but their response is the approach to the access not taken into account via the Kent Fire Service, as they have no power or control over this element. That is obviously a matter for Kent County Council and not for the fire brigade to consider. And I know that's not popular, but that's their response.
Councillor Banks, I do have you on my list, but can I go back to, yeah, and then we'll come back to you too. Yeah. Okay, Councillor Banks.
Thank you, Chairman, for letting me speak. Yes, looking at this, I looked at the three real elements as facilities and I think the biodiversity are the two things, because we know we have to build houses, but I think the whole thing is, I think there are times when the pill needs to be sugar coated a little. And I don't think this is, which is one of the reasons why I'm thinking to myself that this, as Councillor Broughton said, that there will be houses probably built in this site, but let's hope that basically if that happens, we have a better plan than this. I think basically the facilities that I would look at was, I look at, I suppose when the estate was built, there was a centre, there was shops, houses, surgery, and the estate has got larger and larger and larger. But what it also did was all the surrounding areas started to use that basically as a centre. So a lot of people, when it comes to things like doctor surgeries, live in Ryash, they live in Burlington, they live in Leybourne Chase, Leybourne, and they all move into to actually use that facility. There was a facility in Westmoreland, but that closed because in actual fact there was a big facility in Kings Hill. There is an empty building in Leybourne Chase that has no surgery. So I think surgeries, I think, are a really emotive issue with the residents I represent. Basically, the situation, even though mitigation from the point of view of new software is coming in to try and help the situation, it's still a key issue on the doorstep. So I was surprised, basically, two things that have surprised me tonight on this is that one is that looking down the list of 106 bits, no mention is made of money going to a surgery or for primary care, which I find quite surprising because in actual fact, we're going to have maybe 65 new households, which are going to add pressure to the surgery. The other thing were the comments that Councillor Hudson made. And I think the whole thing is we appear to have an almighty logjam between the ICB and the Westmoreland Group practice, which seems to be a hell of a logjam. And I think the whole thing is that I think the whole thing is if we're building new houses, it's the situation we seem to be getting into a leveling down when it comes to things like surgeries. And I think the whole thing is that we should be at least having a stable situation, not actually a deteriorating situation. So there must be a better plan where basically I think, and this applies to several developments, where we improve there. I think the other thing I would say is when it comes down to biodiversity. I went to my course on biodiversity, and I think the whole thing is, one of the questions that I asked is, if you had a brownfield site and it was left, basically, when would you measure the biodiversity? And the answer was basically at the time when you start the development. So if you have, whether it's hard standing or whether it's not hard standing, we're getting into a situation where if nothing's happened on that site for 40 years, then obviously it's getting more and more biodiverse, and it becomes a bigger and bigger issue. This is the first time where I've been in a meeting where we've been talking about offsetting biodiversity to another site to try and mitigate the damage that's being done here. And I must admit, I'm not convinced. I would need a lot more information. So I realise that some of these things are not prime planning matters, but we have to read through an awful lot of notes on mitigating subjects, which actually to help us make our decisions. And I think the whole thing is a lot of reading. But I have to say, I haven't actually found what I really needed be convinced that this particular plan was the site that or the plan that we should go with. Thank you.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. It's been a really interesting. Did you want to talk about your access?
I really, but
Well, you can swap over you want. Yep.
Go on.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to address a couple of points that have been made. When we had the shuttle bus service going from Kings Hill to the station, if we go back to before COVID, Kings Hill was probably half the size that it is now. And with the cost of living crisis, many of our residents have had to go back to working into London to be able to stay in their homes. And so it's even more relevant now that we have a bus service taking people to the station. Councillor Roud talked about traffic jams in East Malling, and with respect, I agree, we do get traffic jams everywhere, but the difference with East Malling is you can turn around and find an alternative route. When something happens in Kings Hill, there's 10,000 residents literally stuck here, not being able to go anywhere. And Councillor Hudson talked about the agreement that was signed by Rouse Kent with regard to access to the surrounding villages. Well, that was signed in the 90s, and much has happened here since then. So I think personally that needs to be looked at again, because Kings Hill was never meant to be this size, and it's still growing now. And if we could please just go back to one of the slides in the presentation, just to talk about the access issue with regard to emergency vehicles. There was a slide at the beginning that shows the entrance up Clear Hart Lane. It was a photo, yeah. Yeah, so if we look at this is Clear Hart Lane, which is a fairly small road. And it's a shame you can't actually see to the top of there, but where there are cars on either side of the road, it is actually impossible, absolutely impossible for any emergency vehicle to get through there. And that is my concern. This road is constantly like that in the evening, at weekends when everyone's home. This was actually at it was daytime. It was around midday. So I think my concerns are justified when it comes to people's safety. Thank you.
Mr. Brown, Councillor Brown.
Madam Chairman, I'll just quickly pick up on Councillor Tanner's point there. We're not asking for additional access, it's emergency access. So in the event that a sinkhole happened on that access road or into the development, you don't end up stranding 65 houses whilst roadworks are done to repair a collapsed sewer, which is actually happening as we speak. I walked past it the other day, a temporary road surface being put over the grass and the pavement into Avion Gardens, whilst tankers come in and out to take sewage away because something's collapsed underneath the sewer and the road has started. So it happened just down the road from this particular site. Therefore, I think a separate emergency access for things like that would be essential if the committee were to approve this. So that's my point on that. I'd just like to remind members that there are 32 planning conditions to make it a viable or an application that the officer feels happy to recommend approval. So it's packed with conditions to try and mitigate the damage that it's going to cause if it goes ahead. And I could just members have already mentioned, in fact, one of the public mentioned the Amber Lane decision, which was rejected and upheld on appeal. And that had ancient woodland around it as well. And there's also a good definition in those documents where it's habitats which would be technically very difficult or take very significant time to restore, recreate or replace once destroyed. So we are, if this goes through, we are destroying quite a biodiverse site. And it would take time to restore, recreate or replace that, taking into account their age, uniqueness, species diversity or rarity. So I'm not happy really that we cannot be sure that there are parts of this site, and Councillor Proud has already said that he remembers, what percentage was it? So the vast majority of this site hasn't been developed. A minority of the site could be regarded as having had a use going back to World War II. So I think I'm not at this point happy that we're not. I mean, it might not well be building on irreplaceable habitat, even if it isn't defined on the map at the moment. And we know that there are discrepancies in the accuracy of that map. Okay, so it may well meet the criteria, even though it's not on the map. So I'm not really comfortable with going down that route. Going back to the development plan, okay, as I repeat myself, having looked at the report that went to the Planning and Transportation Committee, there was no map, there was no indication of the biodiversity on the site or the difference between the vast majority of Kings Hill, which was the airfield, and that site, which you can see, which clearly isn't a field. It's the countryside and it's woodland. So Councillor Tanner has put forward some a reason for reason for refusal already. I think during the course of the debate, I've scribbled a few notes, and I'll sort of row in behind your proposal, Councillor Tanner, and see what the committee thinks. So something along the lines of proposal for refusal, all right, second to Councillor Tanner's original proposal, but I would say that the proposed development, by the virtue of its location, siting, proposed means of access and intensification of residential activities would result in the partial loss and deterioration of the nearby ancient woodland and the on-site irreplaceable habitat. I would also go on to say that I think the proposed development would be harmful to the visual amenity and would not respect the site and its current surroundings. And I would think it would significantly erode the prevailing character of the site and its immediate surroundings and introduce an urbanising feature which would cause visual harm to the appearance of the site and the locality and an inappropriate incursion into the countryside. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Cruz, I know you want to come back. Ms. Bailey.
Ask the officer to go back on theirs, then I'm a couple of things I'd like to come back on before we go some other matters. That's okay.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points. In the regard to the BNG biodiversity net gain, please note that this site doesn't actually have to provide this. It was submitted prior to the government recommendation that's just come into play, but it does actually provide that 10%. So they have gone above what they needed to do on that. So it will achieve 10% biodiversity net gain. Just in regard to conditions, I appreciate there are 32 conditions, but this is also an outline application. So some of those conditions, had it been a full application, might not actually be there because they would have been addressed. And just in regards to Clear Hart Lane itself, it is actually a double road. And I did speak to our refuse waste services, and there doesn't appear to be any issues with a refuse lorry going up and down that road, which is obviously very similar in size to a fire truck.
I think the officer's picked up a lot of the things I was going to raise. The only thing is that on your plan, well, this is our extract, our GIS layer, which shows the ancient woodland layer, which is transposed from the ancient woodland inventory, and you can see that it's not within. There's none of the site is actually within the ancient woodland, and you've got the 15-metre buffer. So I would have to say that, you know, on the basis that the ground that was just mentioned by Councillor Brown wouldn't be able to be substantiated on that basis because it's not within the ancient woodland, and therefore the paragraph that's relevant in the MPPF wouldn't apply in this instance because it's not causing harm. You're putting mitigation measures in place already to address any close proximity to the ancient woodland. So it's not going to result in loss or deterioration of the ancient woodland. And the mitigation and the standing advice, which is the buffer zone, which is designed to protect the ancient woodland. So, you know, on that basis, and I'd just like to reaffirm what the officer says in terms of some of the other concerns. I mean, you are only considering access as part of this application. The principle is already established by the development plan, which, as we've said earlier, you must give significant weight. You must, as I have to reaffirm, what sections 38(6) of the Act says. You must determine in accordance with the development plan. And the development plan allocates this site for up to 65 units. And that's part of our allocation. So you must give that significant weight. Added to that, you've also got, and that's if you even had a 5-year supply, but added to that, we haven't got a 5-year supply. So you're in the tilted balance element where you have to come into significant and demonstrable. And I have to say, there is nothing that's been said tonight that gets anywhere near the significant and demonstrable elements around ancient woodland. It's not in ancient woodland, and there's a 50-metre buffer protection. Issues regarding highways access. You've got comments, no objection from your statutory consultee and Kent Highway Services, Kent Fire Brigade Services, who've actually looked at the mitigation proposed for the access and say the secondary one is not required in this instance due to the mitigation. So there is nothing that I've heard tonight that's come forward that gets you, and I have to be very frank and honest, anywhere close the significant demonstrable tilted balance that you must apply in relation to this, and especially so, and I hate to keep re-emphasising it, the fact that it's an allocated site that you must give significant weight to. So on all those bases, members, I'll just be, I'll carry on listening to the debate as we carry on. Thank you. Just one matter raised in terms of contributions in terms of doctors' surgeries, and I'm just trying to establish if members went through the decision tonight and if the decision was to approve, what I would ask for is delegated authority to make sure we double check in terms of the NHS contribution and make sure that there is that element is factored into whatever decision is taken tonight. So what I would ask at this stage, just to make sure, I want to double check that, because I wouldn't want to then get to the point of making a decision tonight, whatever that may be, and not having that double, triply checked to make sure that contribution is there. So if it does go for a recommendation tonight, I would ask that there is delegation back to the Director of Planning to make sure we go back to the NHS and make sure the ICB and make sure 100% that that contribution is required or not. So I would ask for that now, if I could get that recorded in the minutes now on that basis. Thank you very much.
Did you hear that? Yeah, thank you. Right, Councillor Brown again, please.
Thank you very much for letting me come back. I hear what the officer says, but listening to what the Woodland Trust say, they consider that the buffer zone is not sufficient size, this development, and it will have a potential impact on the surrounding ancient and semi-natural woodland in the area. And we haven't had any evidence to suggest that the 70% of the land that hasn't been used in the past wouldn't meet the criteria of ancient woodland, because we know that there are gaps in the map. And we know that it is a very biodiverse piece of land, and whether or not that would meet the criteria of an irreparable habitat, I'm not convinced. So I think we've had a recommendation with mine added to Councillor Tanner's recommendation, and I'm happy that we lead to the vote. Thank you.
Anybody else who would like to, before we go to a vote? I have some legal advice that needs to be shared.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind members, obviously with what James and some of the councillors said today about the fact that this site is allocated in our local plan. The government has guidance on appeals and explains what type of behaviour may give rise to a substantive award of costs against the planning authority. So it says that we're at risk of cost if we prevent or delay development, which should clearly be permitted, having regard to its accordance with the development plan, national policy, and other material considerations. So I just want us to obviously have that in mind when we're considering this application tonight, because it's clear that it's an application that is already allocated in our local plan. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, if Mr. Bailey could come back.
Just so we get some clarity on the grounds, I think the development manager would like just the grounds to be recited and restated. So if that's okay, just so for clarity purposes, so they can be properly recorded at this time, and then we'll just come back on that basis, please, if that's okay.
Councillor Tanner, would you like to go through your ground first?
Yeah, we'll do it as a double act. So it's me and then followed on by Councillor Brown. Okay, I would like to propose that the committee choose to refuse this application because the proposed development in size and means of access would cause increased levels of vehicular activity along Clear Hart Lane, giving rise to noise and disturbance, being harmful to existing residents in the area. Additionally, the access for emergency vehicles is a major cause of concern, despite the guidance from the emergency services and KCC.
Okay with that? Yeah.
All right. Okay. I'm just trying to read my writing now.
Let's just go a bit slower just to make sure we record.
I could go back and repeat the proposed site by size and means of access, including increased vehicle movements, increased noise and disturbance, and with the additional emergency access, which do you want to repeat the last bit? Cause concern.
I'd like to propose that the committee should refuse this application because the proposed development in size and means of access would cause increased levels of vehicular activity along Clear Hart Lane, giving rise to noise and disturbance, being harmful to existing residents in the area. Additionally, the access for emergency vehicles is a major cause for concern, despite the guidance from the emergency services and KCC.
And the rest of it, Madam Chairman?
And the rest of it.
All right. Okay. So the proposed development, by virtue of its location, siting, intensification of residential activities, would result in the partial loss and deterioration of the nearby ancient woodland and the on-site irreplaceable habitat. Some more. And with the location and siting with a nearby residential settlement, that is Kings Hill, would be at odds with the prevailing character of the immediate and surrounding environment.
Just repeat that bit again.
Yeah, sure. And the siting with a nearby residential settlement would be at odds with the prevailing character of the immediate and surrounding environment. And when you're ready, I think it would be harmful to the visual amenity and would not respect the site and its surroundings. It would significantly erode the prevailing character of the site and its surroundings, and introduce an urbanising feature which would cause visual harm, the appearance of the site, locality, and an inappropriate incursion into the countryside. And that's it. Could I just change that actually to adjacent rather than nearby, because it would be adjacent. I've put all my papers away now. It was, so we're going to change nearby to adjacent.
Ladies and gentlemen, it would seem that we need to go to a part 2.
Okay.
Yes, we'll have a comfort break. And actually, how many people are in the other room? How many people, rather than getting everybody else to move, perhaps the councillors could move. Yeah. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, if we take a 10-minute comfort break and reconvene at 20, if you could come in at 20 past, the councillors will need to go into another room to have a discussion about something legal application, a legal requirement. Yeah.
Don't use the money.
Chair, can I just ask, will those of us online be able to hear what's going on in the other room?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are on our way back. Yeah, we just got to wait for Joy. She's in the bathroom. We're just waiting for one of our officers to return because we needed a break. Sorry, sir. We're nearly done. We are nearly there. Okay, thank you everybody for staying, and we have sorted out some legal issues. I'd like to call on Officer Parker to give us some information.
Thank you, Chair. So we have been given two reasons for refusal. One centred around highways grounds concerning the means of access. And how emergency vehicles are also a cause for concern. And the second one is a principal reason regarding like the intensification of the ancient woodland would cause an irreplaceable habitat, would also cause a significant, it would significantly erode the surroundings and create an urbanising feature. So we've got a highways reason and an in principle reason. No policies were given to those, but both of them, I presume, would be from the MPPF and the development plan, which officers would be delegated officers. However, when I look at both of these, considering that we have a Highways and KCC have said that they don't raise an objection, we wouldn't be able to substantiate ground one, and because also it's an allocated site, I don't feel we'll be able to substantiate ground two either. Also, the site isn't within ancient woodland, so I don't think we can substantiate that part of the reason for refusal either. Therefore, in line with the Constitution, if a recommendation of the Director of Planning and Housing and Environmental Health, if an area committee is minded to determine an application away or on grounds which the Director does not consider can be substantiated, which is in this case, a resolution by committee to make such determination will be of a recommendation only, and the matter shall stand adjourned until the next meeting to enable the Director of Central Services and Monitoring Officer to report on the possibility of costs or compensation awarded against the Council in the event the application is determined in that way. I pass over to Joy to see if she has any further legal advice on that matter.
Thank you. That's the correct position, and that can be found in part 4 of the committee procedure rules, 15.2.5. And Hannah has read out the section, so I don't think I need to. Thank you.
So we will go to a vote. As you understand from Hannah, that if the proposal is rejected, it actually is not, that is not the final thing. It will be referred back to the planning director to come back to this committee. So,
sorry, I was just going to add, I've clarified the section about substantial costs earlier in the meeting. That section's also there, which Hannah hasn't read out, which also says that if the Director of Central, when we've come back to the next meeting, if the Director of Central Services and Monitoring Officer's report indicates that there is likely to be a risk of significant costs being awarded against the council at appeal or a potential liability to pay compensation, committee may not determine the application in the matter contrary to the advice set out in the report, and the resolution by the committee to make such a determination will be a recommendation only, and the application shall stand adjourned to the council for determination. Thank you.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you very much. And I'm conscious for members of the public here and for members of the public who may still be watching online, there was quite a lot of legal jargon. I say that with all due respect that members on this committee would understand. But in essence, I just want to boil this down to the fact that it is the view of the planning and the legal officers in the room that the grounds put forward to refuse this application cannot be substantiated on appeal, and therefore it puts the council at risk of significant costs, and therefore, as is the right and the appropriate procedure, that part of the constitution has been invoked. So we will come back to the next committee to consider a report on what those costs might be. My question is, in the view of the planning officer or any officer really on the table, have they heard any grounds during the member discussion tonight that they might consider could be substantiated on appeal? That isn't to say that our officers might agree with those grounds that are being put forward. Obviously, the recommendation in the papers is to approve planning permission, but if they were to advise members on potential grounds, would they consider us looking at alternative grounds?
Would you like to, Hannah? Or
after listening to the debate, I haven't heard any grounds which I think could be substantiated at appeal. Thank you.
So, members, we have a proposal before us to reject this planning application. We will take a roll call on this. So if you're voting for the proposal, it means rejection of the application, and that will go back to come back to the committee at another time. If you wish to stay with the officers and grant, you are against the proposal. If you'd like to take the roll call.
Thank you. When I call your name, please can you indicate whether you are for, against, or abstaining the motion to refuse proposed by Councillor Tanner and seconded by Councillor Brown? I'll leave the chair to the last. Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor Banks?
For.
Councillor Bolton?
Against.
Councillor Boxall?
For.
Councillor Crisp?
For.
Councillor Dean?
Against.
Councillor Hudson?
Against, unfortunately.
Councillor Roud?
Against.
Councillor Tanner?
For.
Councillor Tutton?
Against.
Councillor Taylor?
Against.
And Councillor Palmer?
I hate to say this because I really would like to reject it, but because I know it's going to go to appeal and we don't have the grounds, I'm afraid I'm going to have to go against.
We have 5 members voted in favour, 7 members voted against. The motion is lost.
So right. So yes, you can finish. Can you finish? The motion is lost. Yes. We were in part two. Those.
On
No,
point
we
of order,
act-
Chair,
right,
can I ask that the public gallery is cleared?
Clear the gallery, please. Ladies and gentlemen, we are still in a meeting. He's very upset. We are still in a meeting. We are still current. Okay. Yeah. So the next motion is to accept the officer's proposal to grant the application. Seconder? Yeah. You can't second it, David.
No, point of order. I think you did say something about taking on board about the medical.
I think we asked the delegated authority if we went for the approval recommendation that the contributions would be delegated to the Director of Planning to seek a surety of that part of the issue. Thank you.
Right, so we now have to go to the part where we actually consider the proposal on the grounds. Is everybody voting the same way they just voted, or do we need to go through another one? Okay. So seconder for Councillor Taylor. So you have to go, yeah.
Right, so now members are voting on approving the application based, as set out in the report with the additional delegation just mentioned by the head of planning. When I call your name, please can you indicate whether you are for, against, or abstaining the motion to approve? Councillor Brown. Councillor Banks.
For.
Councillor Bolton.
Against.
Councillor Boxall.
Against.
Councillor Crisp.
Just, so I'm against the development, so I'm voting for or against. I didn't understand.
Against. This is recommendation to approve. So you're against?
I'm not approving the development.
So if the proposal is to approve the application or to support the officers, so you're going against.
Councillor Dean.
Or
Councillor Hudson.
very reluctantly for.
Councillor Rout.
For.
Councillor Tanner.
Against.
Councillor Tatton.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
For.
Councillor Palmer.
For.
We have 7 members voted in favour, 5 members voted against. The application is approved.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We have no urgent items, no exclusion of press public. Well, we have already. So I will close this meeting at 9:49. Thank you.
Do you ever seen any grey hairs I would have? It's not, it wasn't easy, right?